Wow, talk about overstimulated. This is why I hate Mondays. So there's always so much to catch up with. And, it typically runs into my Tuesdays. This is the first time it's actually run over into a Wednesday. So look, by now, literally everyone knows about what happened with the SCOTUS decision, in which we're going to jump right into that with the details as if we're just now finding out, because I'd like to discuss with you some of the outcomes that I'm not entirely certain that everyone is aware of and what exactly can be done. And from first glance on social media, it seems that most folks are pretty hopeless, to go along with their anger, their frustration, and I want to delve into some of that as well. But by the end of the show today, I'd like to leave my audience with a clear understanding of what our options are and what we can expect. So let's just jump right in. This is an opinion piece from this is a piece about opinions from a few days ago. Justices passed abortion views in their own words and votes. Washington AP, more than a month ago, a stunning leak of a draft opinion by Justice Samuel Alito indicated that the Supreme Court was prepared to take the momentous step of overruling the landmark decision Roe v. Wade from 73, stripping away women's constitutional protections for abortion. And that's just what the court's conservative majority ended up doing on Friday in a ruling that led to abortion bans in roughly half the states. When the court heard arguments in the abortion case from Mississippi in December, it was clear to observers that there was substantial support among conservatives for overturning Roe in a second decision that had established and reaffirmed a woman's right to an abortion. But even before those arguments on Friday's decision, the justices had much to say in public about abortion over the years, in opinions, votes, Senate confirmation testimony, and elsewhere. The 6-3 vote to uphold Mississippi's law banning most abortions after 15 weeks, Chief Justice John Roberts didn't join the conservative colleagues in overturning Roe. He wrote that there was no need to overturn the broad precedents to rule in Mississippi's favor. Alito, in the final decision, wrote Friday that Roe and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the 92 decision, was reaffirmed the right to abortion, were wrong and had to be overturned. Justice Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan, the diminished liberal wing of the court, were in dissent. So let's take a look at John Roberts. Roberts voted to uphold restrictions in two major abortion cases in the majority in 2007, to uphold a ban on a method of abortion opponents called partial birth abortion, in dissent in 2016 when the court struck down Texas restrictions on abortion clinics in a case called Whole Woman's Health. But when a virtually identical law from Louisiana came before the court in 2020, Roberts had voted against it and wrote the opinion controlling the outcome of the case and striking down Louisiana law. The Chief Justice said he continues to believe that the 2016 law was wrongly decided, but that the question was whether to adhere to it in deciding the present case. 2005 confirmation hearing, he said overturning precedent is a jolt to the legal system, which depends in part on stability and even-handedness. Thinking that an earlier case was wrongly decided is not enough. Overturning a case requires looking at the other factors, like settled expectations, like the legitimacy of the court, like whether a particular precedent is workable or not, whether a precedent has been eroded by subsequent developments. In the same hearing, Roberts was asked to explain his presence on a legal brief filed by a George H.W. Bush administration that said Roe's conclusion that there is a right to abortion has no support in the text, structure, or history of the Constitution. Roberts responded that the brief reflected the administration's views. Justice Clarence Thomas, on the other hand, voted to overturn Roe in 92 in his first term on the court. When he was a dissenter in Casey, since then he repeatedly called for those rulings to be overturned. In 2000, he wrote in dissent when the court struck down Nebraska's ban on partial birth abortions, recounting the court's decision in Roe. He wrote in 1973, this court struck down an act of Texas legislature that had been in effect since 1857, thereby rendering unconstitutional abortion statutes in dozens of states. As some of my colleagues on the court, past and present, ably demonstrated, that decision was grievously wrong. Abortion is a unique act in which a woman's exercise of control over her own body ends, depending on one's view, human life or potential life. Nothing in our federal constitution deprives the people of this country of the right to determine whether the consequences of abortion to the fetus and to society outweigh the burden of an unwanted pregnancy on the mother. Although a state may permit abortion, nothing to the Constitution dictates that a state must do so. And we'll skip some of these. So Samuel Alito has a long track record of votes and writings opposing abortion rights as a jurist and earlier as a government lawyer. Alito has voted to uphold every abortion law the court has considered since his 2006 confirmation, joining a majority to uphold the federal partial birth abortion and dissenting in the 2016-2020 cases. As a federal appeals court judge, he voted to uphold a series of Pennsylvania abortion restrictions, including requiring a woman to notify her spouse before obtaining an abortion. The Supreme Court ultimately struck down the notification rule in Casey and reaffirmed the abortion right in 92 by a 5-4 vote. Working for the Republican administration in 1985, Alito wrote in a memo that the government should say publicly in a pending abortion case that we disagree with Roe v. Wade. Around the same time applying for promotion, Alito noted that he was particularly proud of his work, arguing that the Constitution does not protect the right to an abortion. So let's just jump right into this. I mean, immediately, Samuel Alito is completely full of shit. I mean, the majority opinion that he wrote with regard to Dobbs, with, you know, as a matter of fact, on Roe, said that a right must be deeply rooted in the nation's history, and that abortion couldn't be constitutionally protected until the latter part of the 20th century. Such a right was entirely unknown in American law. Indeed, when the 14th Amendment was adopted, 3/4 of the states made abortion a crime at all stages of pregnancy. Dude, the country's very first anti-abortion law came about in Connecticut way fucking back in 1821. You don't just pass a state law for something that isn't already a common enough practice that someone might find issue with it. You know, all that 1821 law did was prevent poisons from being used for abortions. Apparently the process was streamlined so well that even those cave people were able to figure out that if they ingested, you know, some sort of liquid ingredient, that it would cause an abortion, and, you know, maybe worse, hence the law and the limitation of it thereof. But yeah, I mean, just for a frame of reference, it would be another 20 years exactly before folks figured out that those giant human and dragon skeletons that we just kept finding all over the place were dinosaur bones. So Samuel Alito is completely full of shit when he says that abortion isn't rooted in our nation's history and that the right to choose was unknown until the latter half of the 20th century. I mean, for fuck's sake, this guy must not know how phlebotomy came into being, and I'll leave that to you to Google. The majority opinion of Roe v. Wade, which was written by Justice Harry Blackmun, was that, you know, decriminalizing abortion was itself a return to pre-1820s abortion law. But, you know, Samuel Alito doesn't want you to actually Google any of that stuff. I mean, that's the thing, folks. They think you're fucking stupid. They're counting on it. More Supreme Court justices voted in favor of Roe than had voted in favor of Dobbs this time round to overturn Roe. You know, Justice William Douglas wrote that he felt that it was perfectly fine to call a due process, but he had felt that, you know, it was better backed by the 9th Amendment, so it's a right that's not found in the Constitution. Within the Bill of Rights, which honestly, in hindsight, might have been a better idea to link the Roe decision to the Bill of Rights, but hindsight is 2020. But speaking of the 14th Amendment, and yes, we're going to go there. We are. We're going to go there, and we're going to enjoy ourselves every step of the way as we do it. So here's your trigger warning, okay? Because the shit is about to get real. And if what I'm about to say offends you, then you may want to walk away now. This is your last chance. So speaking of the 14th Amendment, let's talk about Justice Clarence Thomas just a little bit more now, shall we? Now, Clarence Thomas wrote in his concurrence regarding Dobbs and about Roe that the court should go further. Okay, and that they should use the same logic regarding due process in a few other cases. What other cases, you ask? Well, he mentioned them by name. Obergefell v. Hodges, where the SCOTUS decided that same-sex couples have a right to marry. Clarence Thomas served on the court for that case and wrote his dissenting opinion, again, rejecting due process. He claimed that judges could roam at large in the constitutional field, guided only by their personal views as to the fundamental rights protected by that document. And that the ruling undermines democracy, but I guess he and his wife wouldn't know anything about that, and we'll get to that in just a bit. He also wrote the decision exalts judges at the expense of the people from whom they derive their authority. Yes, because nothing says I'm better than you than giving more people the same rights as everyone else. We can't have that now, can we? That'd be too much like right. The majority cited due process and equal protection as to why folks in the queer community are now allowed to marry, and cited older cases such as Griswold v. Connecticut, Loving v. Virginia. We'll get into that. So another case that Clarence Thomas wants to look further into, he mentioned, is Lawrence v. Texas. Now, he also served on the SCOTUS at the time this case was heard. His dissenting opinion was that the majority, well, he wrote 2 fucking paragraphs. He once again claimed that there is no general right to privacy offered by the Constitution. He did also write that the law that they were hearing about was uncommonly silly. And he wrote that punishing someone for expressing his sexual preference through non-commercial consensual conduct with another adult does not appear to be a worthy way to expend valuable law enforcement. Yet this guy wants to spend valuable tax dollars hearing this case again, today maybe. And if you haven't already guessed, we're talking about anal. Like anal. It's sodomy law, folks, that the court struck down. So states at that time had the right to make anything but missionary legal if they so choose. And something tells me that if Amy Coney Barrett were the governor of Missouri, at that time, this would definitely be getting a pass. At least a push. The majority opinion in Lawrence, again, due process, 14th Amendment, Griswold v. Connecticut. Are you seeing a pattern here, folks? So Clarence Thomas was not serving on the SCOTUS for Griswold as it took place in 1965, but that's okay. He still wants to overturn that shit anyway. What ruling is that? Well, in 1965, the SCOTUS decided that not because of due process and the 14th Amendment, but because of the First Amendment, the Third Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, and the Fifth Amendment, under the Bill of Rights, contraceptives were a constitutional right. This ruling defeated any laws banning any form of contraception because way back in the 1800s, there had been what are referred to as Comstock laws that banned things like contraceptives, sex toys, whatever porn was back then. The majority opinion read in part, would we allow the police to search the sacred precincts of marital bedrooms for telltale signs of the use of contraceptives? The very idea is repulsive to the notions of privacy surrounding the marriage relationship. Now, this is where I'll start to sound a little familiar. Justice Hugo Black wrote in his dissent, I get nowhere in this case by talk about a constitutional right of privacy as an emanation from one or more constitutional provisions. I like my privacy as well as the next one, but I'm nevertheless compelled to admit that government has a right to invade it unless prohibited by some specific constitutional provision. That sounds about right. Sounds kind of familiar too, though, doesn't it? I guess it's a good thing that they decided to include the entire fucking Bill of Rights, basically, as to their constitutional provision, basically as a fuck you to Hugo Black. For being that guy. And again, those are just, the cases that Clarence Thomas has written that he wants to review. Okay. So He wants to strike down Griswold, which guarantees contraceptives and other things. To make sure they can't be banned. He wants to strike down Lawrence v. Texas, which allows for sex that's a little bit more like what Jimmy Swaggart's into and a little bit less like what Jimmy Swaggart wants only married people who are straight to be able to have. And he wants to strike down Obergefell, which allows for people who love each other to get married regardless of who they are and how the fuck their neighbors feel about it. But the thing is, that last one, it's actually only allowed and was referenced an even older court ruling that strangely enough, Clarence Thomas didn't seem to mention. I wonder why. So, gay marriage is brought to you in part by the SCOTUS ruling way back in 1967. Without Loving v. Virginia, there would be no possibility for a court ruling to allow for gay marriage, and yet Thomas, who is obviously against due process and the right to privacy, unless, of course, it's his wife privacy, is an insurrectionist, but wait, why isn't he interested in this one? Could it be his wife? It has to be, because Loving v. Virginia is the only thing allowing Clarence Thomas, a black man, to be legally married to Jeannie Thomas, a white woman. And yes, the court decided in that ruling that laws banning interracial marriage violated due process under the 14th Amendment. But he's not really interested in talking about that, right? And to be completely fair, I get it. I do. I get it. Clarence Thomas is 74. He's a black man on the Supreme Court. He's been on the wrong side of history basically his entire life. And now that he's at the end of his life, he wants to leave a legacy of destruction and bullshit marked by bigotry and xenophobia. He's basically Putin, and he's showing himself as such. Now, I'll leave you with this final thought. I have seen a ton of posts displaying the Supreme Court in a very bad light. I've seen Amy Coney Barrett all decked out in a full hijab. Folks are saying that Clarence Thomas won't go against interracial marriage because he has a white wife who's a fucking psycho. Which I'm perfectly fine with this stuff. I've seen it. You know, and everybody else seems perfectly fine with it, but I can't help but notice that it's mostly white leftists who are posting this stuff. And again, I'm perfectly fine with it, but I can't help but think about the people who probably should be completely fucking losing their marbles and outraged about it. And yet, now about 22 days ago, I said some things about transphobic women, not TERFs, but tradwives. So if you're unfamiliar with the terms, a TERF is an acronym for trans exclusionary radical feminist, and, you know, still consider themselves radical feminists despite being trans exclusionary. And a tradwife is just shorthand for, you know, traditional wife. It's completely harmless by itself. But, you know, when you throw in the homophobia, the transphobia, it's not really so great, right? But I said some colorful things, shouting down transphobes, and boy, did the fit hit the shan. The response was not positive, but I did not expect it to be. One person even asked me if I'm okay with saying what I said about women, as if what I said wasn't explicitly referencing only bigots who happen to have uteruses. But I was asked if I would be okay with calling a racist black man an Uncle Tom. And I gave it quite a bit of thought, just as I had given my previous statement quite a bit of thought. And honestly, I didn't think that I would be that comfortable with it. You know, self-reflection. I don't know. I mean, I guess if that person was, you know, actively working to enslave marginalized people, you know, as a minority, I might feel strongly about that. Or I don't know, maybe if that person was actively working to strip away the civil rights of marginalized people, then yeah, I might feel perfectly comfortable with it. But you know what? Here's the thing. I don't actually have to do that. I don't actually have to even say that. Because just a couple days ago, Samuel L. Jackson already tweeted about Uncle Clarence. And again, the leftists are just losing their marbles about him. Now listen, here's the thing, folks. Last Friday, a xenophobic tradwife just took away every woman in the country's civil rights. Last Friday, a xenophobic tradwife just took away every trans man's civil rights. Last Friday, a xenophobic tradwife just took away the civil rights of every trans woman that I haven't even considered yet. And from the sound of it, neither is the opposition. But listen, as far as the TERFs go, I can't help but be informed, and I can't help but notice that now that Becky and Karen lost their civil rights to a transphobic tradwife, suddenly they want to be friends with everybody in every marginalized community. Whereas before it was all about white women's rights. I mean, women's rights. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to completely forget that you exist. What were your pronouns again? And now it's just please anyone, help me. Dare I say that the reaction of these cis straight white females is very similar to the reaction that I have been seeing coming from cis straight white men when they lose their marbles because someone says all men. And I get that. I feel you. I really do. For the average white woman, it isn't your fault. It isn't. It's the fault of the leaders in the TERF movement. It's the fault of the leadership in the white feminist revolution who somehow keep forgetting that trans people and that people of color matter. Unless, of course, they have nothing else to do on a Thursday night or, whenever it suits their needs to include everyone with a uterus or women who are born without one. Since this does, in fact, include all of them. It's the epicenters of white exclusionary of non-inclusive white feminism that are not only conveniently forgetting everyone's pronouns, now that they're noticing that they're losing ground at the top of the food chain, and yes, I said at the top of the food chain, to cis women of color and to all trans people, partly because of the very, very slow but warm embrace that they're getting from socially and through acceptance and but also because of the very, very real and ever-present danger of this SCOTUS decision that puts everyone that isn't a cis male in peril of losing their civil rights. Look, folks, I've said this before. I don't fucking need a uterus to tell that there's a problem here. Not just from the outside, but from within. This ruling is going to affect so many people. It already has affected so many people across this country. The absolute last thing anyone needs right now is more authoritarianism coming from those centers of support. For almost 2 months now, since this tweet had first been posted, I've seen folks who position themselves as leaders losing their absolute fucking shit minds about the girls camping trip meme. Okay? That went viral on Twitter, then also took off on, somebody made a meme about it, posted on Facebook. And if you haven't seen it yet, I'd be surprised. But it was originally posted, and I believe, I could be wrong. I believe it was originally posted by a non-binary trans person. At least that's what I was told. I could be completely wrong. And if I am, I apologize. Feel free and let me know. But that was just my understanding at the time. This tweet went fucking viral, and it was later posted elsewhere as a meme that spread like wildfire, right? And so I saw people who were saying, oh, well, you can't say that. It's not genuine. It's not offering any help. The people who post this aren't actually going to take anyone camping across state lines, and that may be true. We can definitely give that a pass. But then I saw folks who were shitting on people who were posting it and calling it performative activism. Now, we can have an entire fucking conversation about the importance of performative activism and the tip of the spear versus the shaft of the spear, and why people who are on the cutting edge of social issues should not expect and definitely shouldn't shit on people who just now found out that there's a problem. So you fast forward until last week, and I saw even more people on social media after the overturning of Roe posting this same meme or something very similar all over the place. Now, here's why I have a problem with those so-called leaders who shit on their followers and their potential allies, and why folks who spend 100% of their time focusing on these issues shitting on people who just now found out that this is a problem. Ask yourself, why is it that I saw more of this kind of messaging and more of these kind of posts from people last week than I did last month when the SCOTUS leak came out? Why is that? We had, almost 2 months now to know what was coming. Why did more people post it on Friday, Saturday, Sunday than had posted it when the tweet first came about? Well, the quick answer is because people who work a 9-to-5 and have 5 kids to drop off at school, pick up and take to soccer practice, come home, eat dinner, maybe only watch the news for news and local news and events and weather. All they heard last month was that Roe was in danger and that something could happen. Then a month went by of doing that same shit. Just like I mentioned before about people like Farron Cousins' wife, who didn't watch the Trump riots in real time, didn't follow the press coverage, and only saw the events that unfolded, almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, during the January 6th Select Committee hearings, a fucking year after it happened. It just became real for them last Friday, and they had the whole fucking weekend to freak out because they had other shit to do. A very good friend of mine was telling me about an event that she had went to recently. She was out for several days. She was with her daughter and their friends. It was several days of heat, music, fun, shiny things, colors, bonfires, the whole works, just getting away from that 9-to-5 bullshit and getting away from the little black box that gets them away from the 95, getting away from it all. Okay? Then one morning, she woke up and she heard some folks talking about what had happened. Now, she is very, very up to date on what's actually going on out there. She keeps up with things like a fucking hawk. Okay? She walked into the reception area to a fucking massacre. She saw her teenage daughter just bawling her eyes out, snot dripping. If there's a liquid that comes out of a human head, it was coming out of hers. And that girl was she was amongst a sea of women in that hall, just beside themselves in the exact same condition. Because to those people, they didn't get a month or two to prepare for this. For those people, this all just happened just now. So when I see these so-called leaders acting so smug and so, well, I told you so, at the people who trust them, it's sickening. You have to call it what it is. It's elitism. That's why I have no problem with calling it out. To quote one group leader, not even involved in this kind of an issue, her intersectionality is that she's a white woman. Okay? Cis white woman. To quote one group leader from Moms Demand Action, Laura Burkhart, and this is just regarding a completely different topic, but I feel that this is just universal. She said, "You're prioritizing how you handle your own outrage and trauma over how others do. And yes, before all my critics come out and lose their fucking marbles because I'm saying any of this, I already read the statement put out by Planned Parenthood Toronto about girls' camping trips being dangerous. Okay? I could be wrong. I'm thinking that they meant that it's dangerous to actually take up strangers on traveling across the country or wherever. Okay? But I could be wrong. And if Planned Parenthood Toronto actually meant what these leaders are saying on social media about giving false hope and about making it seem like there's more support than there actually is, then fuck them. Yes, I said fuck Planned Parenthood. Only if that's the case. Only if that is the case in this situation. All this bullshit about states can come after you, as we saw, is complete and utter bullshit, at least for now. And honestly, that's actually thanks to Justice John Roberts, who also was in the majority of overturning Roe, strangely enough. Referencing that states can't actually go after people for leaving their home state to get an abortion. So seriously, enough with the bullshit of states can come after you for taking someone out of state. Okay, I'm sure they're going to try and push to change that, but as it stands now, it's just bullshit. Just because they're experienced leaders in the movement doesn't mean that they can't be grossly wrong some of the time and about some things. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi are more worried about winning elections and fundraising right now than doing a goddamn thing to help the people who are affected by the SCOTUS ruling. And remind me again what it is that they do for a living, because I seem to have forgotten. So while regular folks have nowhere else to turn, we can at least find solace in trying to remember to send that $15 to the DNC.